Hello, friend. Welcome to another episode of the Mount Rushmore of Everything. This week, we're talking about comic strips. I'll go with the first one. I think it's easy, non-negotiable, one of my three non-negotiables, and that's Peanuts.
Yes, I agree.
It's the easiest. If I had to pick one, I would pick Peanuts. We don't have to pick one, thankfully. But if I did, it would be Peanuts. Number 3 on Ranker for whatever it's worth. But more importantly, ran from 1950 to 2000. Was done by Charles Schulz literally every time he didn't have somebody help him with the art. Literally everything is Charles Schulz. Most iconic strip of all time, in my opinion. Peanuts, except for one person, was universally like that first one that people mentioned. Arguably the longest story ever told by one human being, in that it was I believe, daily comic for those 50 years. Helped make that 4-panel gag strip the U.S. standard, and he won the Reuben Award twice, which is apparently a prestigious award for comic strips, and Schulz was the first to do it with Peanuts. All in all, I think it speaks for itself, but there it is, Peanuts.
It's the ultimate comic strip. It's the one that, even in many papers is on top of, first page on top. And it's considered the world's most popular comic strip.
Yep.
So that says it all.
For sure. That's not even including the movies that they made off.
No, just a comic strip.
Yeah. But that is somewhat indicative of how important of a comic it was, and sort of to a logic I've used before, the fact that, for the most part, I would say it's legendary as a comic strip, despite how iconic its seasonal movies are. It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, and the Christmas one, of course, the Thanksgiving one, super iconic, played every single year. And yet, even with how iconic the strip is in that sense, you still think of it like a comic strip, which is pretty impressive.
Second one I'm going to give you, and yes, I'm biased again for this one, but I'm going to go with Calvin and Hobbes.
I think it's not negotiable.
It was interesting. It was funny. It was deep. It got really existential sometimes.
For sure.
In many ways. And he experimented. There are some comic strips there that are either very well drawn, but they're not funny.
Sure.
Or are really funny, but the art is not the greatest. Yeah. But he was a very good artist and a very good writer, or is, I should say, was at the time that he was doing it anyways. He has inspired a lot of artists also.
We talked about this a little bit last time, talking about the characters, but I think it's very important to note that he didn't allow anybody to make product or movies or shows off of this, and yet the comic, with having literally nothing outside of, a few illegal t-shirts out there or whatever, but it's not like, say, with a Peanuts, you can argue, well, it was boosted even more based on the movies and the merchandise. So you could say that the iconicness was inflated past the actual iconicness of the comic strip. Calvin and Hobbes, you can't make that argument.
Nope.
Even though it's number 1 on Ranker, for example, even though it's almost the consensus GOAT, I feel like I couldn't find a list of greatest comic strips that did not have this. There were a lot of other ones that came and went. Pretty much everybody agreed on Peanuts. Literally everybody agreed on Calvin and Hobbes, and usually the people's excitement around it is next level. And you could say, well, that's because it's more recent. And sort of, but it also isn't, because Peanuts still had new strips all the way up until 2000, as we talked about before. And sure, its heyday was more that 50s, 60s, 70s era, but it was still going all the way to 2000, and Calvin and Hobbes was done by 95. So if that's true, then even more so there would be recency bias towards Peanuts, and now it's hard, it's easy to forget, but 1995 is 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? So the fact that it's still number 1 25 years later, when there's been other comics to come up, there's been online comics to become a big thing, and the fact that Calvin and Hobbes is still that consensus, everybody's Peanuts is the most iconic, one of the best, all these other ones, but the reverence for Calvin and Hobbes, I think, really speaks for itself. Time to go to a third one.
Yeah. Give it to us, my friend.
This is where maybe we can start to disagree, but for me, this is also non-negotiable, and it's Garfield. Number 6 on Ranker. It's lost its way a little bit as far as the popularity department, but it's the world's most widely syndicated comic strip. It's everywhere. Garfield's another one that, in my mind, at least speaks for itself. It's another one that when you ask people anecdotally, Peanuts and Garfield are the big two, and then some people are like, oh, and Calvin and Hobbes. How did I forget that? But Garfield is absolutely in that elite company, and I think there's a very steep drop-off after these three, to the point that these three are there. I think they're non-negotiable. Figuring out what even remotely deserves to be in the company of these three, I think, is a difficult position, which is what really helps solidify Garfield for me. Is it's one of those that, like, it has all the evidence and nothing really, no good reason to take it off.
I didn't want to have it. I really didn't. But it's really hard to pick another one
over it.
All that to say, I agree with you. I think that the facts are there. The importance, the relevance is there. So it is hard to say, no. I mean, there are other arguments for a few there, but none as heavy as it is with Garfield. Even if you have not read much of Garfield, you know that he is lazy. You know that he hates Mondays. You know that he loves lasagna. There's the dog, Odie. You know that John, his owner, is a single goofy guy. You know all of these things. You're familiar with the
lore, if you will.
Yeah.
You know? So we are 3 for 3 so far. I'll be surprised if we... Well, last time you said this, we ended up agreeing. I'm just going to throw that out there. You said, that's it, and then we agreed.
I think you're not... I have my reasons for this one. I don't know what you're going to go with, but I'm really... I don't know.
All right, go for it.
Oh, you want me to go? Oh, that's right, because you started.
That's right, yeah.
I'm going to go with a little comic strip by a Mr. Gary Larson called The Far Side.
Okay. I deeply considered it.
It's a very influential and respected by artist comic strip. And it's done. This one, I didn't go with the popularity, but just with the legacy, with the type of humor. He went in a different direction, so he was more of a trailblazer with his one panel. So it's a very important comic strip, a very important artist. He went against the current at his time. In this case, I think the influence that he has had in other artists, in other comic strips, I don't think is like a dark horse in this case. Is just more of a not super popular one, but
I feel like it's pretty popular.
It is, but again, when you compare it with the other three that we just mentioned,
like if we were to categorize by Mount Rushmore category, so again, yes, we always hate on categories, but that's category of the element, right? So saying like, well, we'll separate a funny cartoon versus a philosophical one. Those are the categories we don't like, but it is worth breaking up into the categories of, okay, what are the different things relevant to whether it should be on the Mount Rushmore? Popularity's an element here, but other elements are iconicness, importance, which your argument is mostly from the importance standpoint. And I think importance is huge to this one. Yeah. So I don't think the popularity takes it out of this, especially because, as I said before, I thought there's a huge drop off to this fourth one. So no matter what you're picking, there are issues. The only ones that I think score high in all of the popularity, iconic, important, we've already covered those. Yeah. From here, it's all like you're going to compromise something. So I like the pick. But you're right that we don't agree. I thought that the main argument that was good for it was that single panel. Because that's the one for that. So important to the art form. Major points in his favor. I struggle with this mightily. Overall, I'm going to go with the tough decision. It's a little bit of a gut thing. There's stuff to back it up, but man, I'll talk a little bit after. It might be in a separate video. Some of the things that I thought we snubbed. But I'm going with Dilbert.
I considered Dilbert. I really did. That was in one of my snubs.
Printed in over 2,000 newspapers in more than 65 countries, which is more than a lot of the other ones I was looking at. Time magazine placed Dilbert among the most influential Americans of 1997, the only fictional character on the list. The Dilbert Principle book became top-selling management book in 1997 based off of this. And those are not so much evidence so much as at this point, it's sort of a gut. There's not much measurements to go off of. But I remember that even though most of my experience with comic strips as a kid, I wouldn't have been interested in Dilbert. And yet I remember it. I remember how it was actually on the left and it went vertically, at least in my newspaper. Overall, this was the one that stood out to me. And I had several people mention it to me. So Everybody said
Yeah, it's a good pick.
Everybody said Peanuts. Everybody said Calvin and Hobbes
Yeah.
for the most part. There were like a few people that were like, oh, I forgot Garfield for a hot sec, or maybe it was Peanuts or Calvin and Hobbes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Dilbert was one. There was actually, I asked a coworker today, and the first thing said Dilbert. Like, boom. And he had to think to even get to Peanuts, which surprised me. He had to look up what the Charlie Brown one was. So, which I found interesting, just as that like final confirmation for me that like, I was struggling with this one versus a couple other ones, but nobody mentioned the couple other ones that I was really struggling with. And Dilbert did get mentioned a couple of times. Now, I recognize that being somebody who is in business, I'm a software developer, there might be some level of like, yes, to people that I work with, there's a natural reason why they would have more of a propensity to it. But even when I looked up, like there were some lists about by decade, the top comic, and that was the one for the 2000s, I think. So overall,
yeah,
I feel good about it, but I would not fight anybody on. I think there are plenty of wrong answers. Yeah. But there's also plenty of right or arguable answers for this fourth spot. Let us know what you think. What do you think deserves to be on the Mount Rushmore of comic strips? Let us know in the comments below. We want to hear what you think. Give us the reason why the ones you picked deserve to be there. If you enjoy this content, be sure to click the notification bell after you smash the subscribe button. And of course, don't smash that subscribe button until you've already absolutely obliterated the like button. Okay, because you obviously enjoyed this video. You came all the way to the end of the video, and you're still watching this. As usual, thank you for tuning in, and we will talk to you next time. You can hide behind your computer screen, nobody ever knowing who was it that gave us that little blue thumbs up. I'll never know. Carlo will never know, but we will love you and we will thank you. Thank you, all powerful Google.